We turn to you for your tech and your intelligence expertise here. And actually, you say this is the moment for intelligence officers to shine. Why?
So one of the really important questions going forward is going to be just how much damage was done to Iran's 3 main nuclear facilities. And I mean, it seems obvious to say it, but you can't exactly walk up to these facilities on the ground and take a look. So it's going to be the skill and the work of people who do things like geospatial analysis, people who collect human intelligence to really do their best work here and figure out what was destroyed and what wasn't. And why that matters is because if Iran was left with an enrichment capability and with a weaponization capability, they could try to sprint to a weapon as soon as the Israeli campaign is over.
What's really interesting is, I think, military satellite makers. In fact, one of them's eyeing an IPO at the moment, ICI. Can you tell us a little bit about the assets that need to be in place for us to get the imagery that's necessary here?
It's a really interesting moment for what we call open source intelligence, and that's just another way of saying that all of these industry actors that are out there with these amazing satellite constellations are doing phenomenal work trying to map and identify things that are going on inside Iran. So you've got the government's exquisite assets, and we call them exquisite because they are the most advanced, generally speaking. They can do things like loiter over an area to actually get continuous coverage of a space. But then you have this huge industry space where all of these actors are coming out with really quite good information and a lot of coverage that the government can't provide. And the combination of those two things is going to give us great insight into what's going on the ground inside Iran.
And now the market, but most notably the administration, has to play out what the best and the worst case scenarios potentially are here. What, from a defense tech perspective, might come into play?
So they're going to have to think a lot about defense stocks. We've talked a lot about the defense industrial base inside the U.S. and how deep our bench is, basically, on some of the key weaponry that we have. Before this round of strikes, there was a big debate inside the administration about what you needed to preserve for a China contingency, what you could send to Ukraine, and what you could maintain in the Middle East. This particular operation didn't really draw down our stocks much at all. We can pretty easily replace what we used. But if you're looking at more of a drawn-out contingency, if Iran were to unwisely retaliate against the U.S. in a really dramatic way, and you're looking at much more activity on the ground, what you'd want to think about is, do you have the defense stocks to backfill what you're spending, and can you do it quickly?
And we have supply chain analysis from certain companies. Giovanni's one of them, for example. I'm interested, Emily, as to which is the forward-looking analysis for whether we have the manufacturing capability here in the United States. That is something that many people have debated about, bringing that sort of expertise back to the U.S.
It is the key question for the next probably 10 years of deterrence against China. One has to think that they looked at what we just did and went, oh, the U.S. is serious. However, any kind of modeling that we've done of a conflict between us and China, if it were unfortunately to happen, shows that we would run out of precision weaponry very quickly and have to move to backfilling rapidly with our defense industrial base. And that involves not just manufacturing know-how, but also the ability to scale up very quickly. The U.S. likes to think of itself in the sort of the World War II context, where we flipped a switch and all of a sudden there was all this, dramatic growth in American manufacturing of planes and boats. I hate to say it, but today's F-35 cannot be made in a Ford factory. You have to have much more specific kind of construction. And we really need to think about preparing for that contingency, in part because we hope it doesn't happen.
But Emily, actually, we've seen that preparation. It's inspired the likes of Palmer Luckey, of Trace Stevens, to go out there and build Anduril because they've been worried about how quickly we can deploy and manufacture here in the United States. Have we seen that industrial base thicken enough in recent years for this moment?
It has thickened, but not enough. You're absolutely right about Palmer Luckey. Chris Brose, who also is at Anduril, is one of the foremost proponents of this, talking about how we can't just depend on what we have to think about how to build. I think that Anduril is leading the way in this. Palantir is in a way too, but a lot of other sort of bigger defense firms need to catch up. Also, I talk to these folks all the time, and what they say is that they're not going to make these huge capital investments if they don't have a demand signal from the U.S. government. Right. So they look at the government and they say, where's our demand signal? And the government sort of shrugs and says, well, it's either stuck in Congress or it's stuck in the president's budget, or we can't give it yet. And that kind of chicken-egg situation is what is keeping us from really building up the way we need to.
So are they getting any more signal at this moment? Because it feels as though there's trying to be the words, but what you're saying is that they need the walk, not just the talk at this moment.
Absolutely. So it's nice to sit in a meeting and hear, yes, we need to build up our defense industrial base. But before you spend millions of dollars on a new facility and the environmental studies and recruiting all of the talent you need to recruit, what you want is words on paper. The contracts are what's really going to have to come.
Is there enough money financing the startups, or at least the ecosystem, to be able to put it there? Because there are innovative ways in which we can finance the build out from some of the legacy defense companies, not just the venture capital companies that have been there to foster the Andurils and Sonics and those sorts of companies.
Right. So this year's $1 trillion defense budget, depending on how you measure it, was meant to do some of that, to really bolster that startup ecosystem. Plus, the Defense Department has done some innovative things trying to create alternative funding mechanisms for some of these smaller companies. Really what the tension is that if you're not one of the big prime defense contractors, you don't have the multitude of lawyers and government affairs officials and people who have run through government contracts, 500 times to really help you break through that bureaucracy. So one of the things that I think people are really hoping to see out of the Trump administration is a new way of doing business that is much more welcoming to the tech startups and kind of the alternative defense companies. Things like Sons of Anduril and Palantir.
So that's the technology play, of which you are key with expertise. What about the intelligence side here as well? Because are we seeing enough innovation there to be able to decipher what the next move is for Iran?
It's never enough innovation. So this is really an interesting moment for open source intelligence. I grew up in the intelligence community. I grew up believing that what we were getting on the classified side was going to be far better than what we could ever get on the open source side. And for a long time, that was true. But the space has really changed. The amount of open, commercially available data that's out there in the world really can bolster and change the game for intelligence. And there's some companies out there that are trying to do that are working with AI, that are working with huge amounts of data to try to pull the signal out of the noise. It's a moment, I think, for the intelligence community to sort of be open-minded. There's some great leaders inside the IC right now who are working on this and working to partner with the private sector to make the intelligence that we collect on the classified side fit really well with that open source intelligence, and the two together is going to be much stronger than anything we had in the past.